Good evening and a good Woche to everybody, and welcome to the daily Rambam Shiur, lesson 194, 195, the conclusion of Hilchos Temurah and Tumas Meis from Perek Aleph until Hey. It is always a minhag Yisrael to start Motzei Shabbos with a Hasidic story as a segula to all the great things. And today, when we are marking the birthday of the Rebbe Rashab, there is no need to search for stories after the most of the times when the Rebbe was conducting a Farbrengen these days. He used to share the story that took place with the Rebbe Rashab when he was 5 years old and he was visiting his grandfather, the Tzemach Tzedek, bursting out crying and responding to the question of the Tzemach Tzedek, why is he crying? What bothers him so much? He says he just came from a visit at the Cheder where their teacher was sharing with them this story that God Almighty visited Avram Avinu, what we read today in the Torah. And his question, how come he visited Avram Avinu and he doesn't reveal himself to us? And he answered him that since a tzaddik, a righteous person in the age of 100 years old, he takes upon himself to circumcise himself, it is worthwhile that God Almighty should reveal himself to him. And this is a famous question and an answer that throughout the years, each and every time when the Rebbe was presenting this story, a different angle, a greater depth was analyzed around this story. And the Mishneh Achrono, the last time when the Rebbe was Farbrengen with us, Leis Ato, the lesson that the Rebbe was applying it to us, since the story became known, obviously must have an element that each and every one can relate to it. So what is the lesson that each and every one, despite the level of godliness and spirituality he may find himself, still this story will be relevant? And the emphasis that the Rebbe made, that given that each and every one of us views Avram Avinu as our forefather, and every child carries the genetics of his parents. So, though obviously they are way superior than us when it comes to Avodas Hashem and spiritual achievement, but yet at the core, Chayav Odom, a person is obligated to say, Mosai Yagiu, Maisai Lemaisei, Avoisei Avram Yitzchak v'Yaakov, when he will finally reach in deeds the action of his forefathers. And this gives us the legitimacy to demand how come God doesn't reveal himself to us, because since we are carry, whether we want it or not, whether we sensing it or not, we are carrying those spiritual qualities that our forefather were having, and this itself justify this demand. And exactly in Hashgacha Pratis, this is well connected with the contents of the first chapter in our Shir, which happens to be the final chapter of both Hilchos Temurah and the conclusion of Sefer Korbanos. And basically, the central theme that goes throughout the entire Perek, but as a default, each and every offspring of a Kodoshim, or a offspring of a Temurah of Kodoshim, should be dealt as the original Kodoshim that he is the offspring of it. Unless a side issue, an external cause came into the picture that will direct a different result. For that reason, the exceptions will be in a Tmuras Chatos or a Vlad Chatos, that there is a specific halacha leMoshe Misinai in Chomesh Chatois HaMeisais, that the Chatois will have to die. There is another exception when it comes to the offspring of a Temurah of a Osham, since it was an avail was done in connection to type of a korban that needs to atone. The avail was defect that he was actually exercising an act that is prohibited. To make a Temurah is a prohibited activity. For that reason, since it is an atonement, cannot be a animal which was participating in a process of an avail to be used as a tool of atonement. And for that reason, the ruling is that if the Osham, the guilt offering, was a Zohor, a male, so the rule, he needs to graze until he will have a defect, he will be sold, and a oilo will be brought in his proceeds. In an ekevo, since an ekevo would not fit for a Osham anyway, so for that reason, she need to graze, and with the proceeds, they will actually bring a Osham, since it was not even fit to be a Osham to begin with, so I can bring a Osham. On the other hand, when there is no side issues, whether it's an issue of Chatois or whether it is an issue that ein category nase sanegir, that a prosecutor cannot be used as a defender, and for that reason, like a concept of a mitzvah habo ba'aveiro, any type of a mitzvah that came about via a action of an aveiro cannot be fulfilled with the ultimate original purpose. So in a case of a vlad of a shlomim, a offspring of a shlomim, a offspring of a Temurah of a shlomim will be dealt like a shlomim. Similar if it will be a toido, besides the lechem, but generally it will be a toido. When it comes to a oilo, so depends if it is a zoho, a offspring of a oilo, will be a oilo. If it is an ekevo that cannot be a oilo, so will graze until a mom will fall and will bring with the proceeds oilo. When it comes to the offsprings of meiser and bechoir, they need to graze until a defect will appear to them and will be eaten by a kohen, in case it is a bechoir, and they will have to be eaten by the owner in case it is a meiser. The reason is again a side issue because it is a gzeiro. If I'm gonna let him do it, he may raise them in order to megadel, he may leave them in order to raise adorim, entire herds of animals. So it's a side issue that comes into the picture that prevents the actual exercise that their vlad, their offspring, will be used the same way as they would have to be used. If it comes to a vlad Temurah a Pesach, offspring of a Pesach Temurah, it will be like a Pesach. If the mother will have to be brought as a shlomim, in case that he offered it after Chatzois, so he himself will be brought as a shlomim. If the mother will have to be grazed until a mum will fall and then should be sold for a shlomim in case he was dedicating it before Chatzois when there is no real kedusha of Pesach to begin with, so the offspring will be dealt the same way. Generally, it is prohibited a person to change and to divert the kodoshim from one status to the other. For example, he takes an animal that is already holy in kedushas oilo, he cannot transfer it to Kedusha Shlomim or vice versa. And also from Kodshei Mizbeach, he cannot divert it and redirect it to Kodshei Bedek HaBais. Though it is prohibited, nevertheless it is not subject to any lashes, since it is a lav shein b'maaseh, it is only associated with dibur. Since a b'choir becomes holy only in its birth, not before, not while he is still in a state of being a fetus, so therefore it is okay to direct him into a kedusha of oilo before he was born. Since only a kodoshim that already are kodoshim, I'm not allowed to redirect them to change their kedusha into another kedusha. But before the kedusha appears like in a bechoir, it is okay to do it. The end of Hilchos Temurah, the Rambam dedicates to some important ethical lessons, which some of the expressions were frequently used by the Rabbi. For example, the Rambam writes that most of the rules of the Torah, they are considered to be eitzos merochik, advice from far, migdol ha'eitzos, from the greatest advisor, in order lesakin hadeos uleyasher kol hamaisim, in order to improve the deos. Deos can tolerate two meanings, and both of them happens to be right. Deos means the hashkofo, the view, the ideological viewpoint a person will take. Deos, according to the terminology of the Rambam himself, just by the fact he was heading an entire section under the headlines of Hilchos Deos, which are reference to the midos, to the traits a person should adopt. So the purpose of most mitzvahs HaTorah, according to the Rambam, is in order to improve and to upgrade both the hashkofo a person will have, the viewpoint a person will have, and also the midos, the traits, the emotional traits he should adopt, and leyasher, to straighten the action. And the reason of the Temurah, since Torah yodo lesoif daitoi, Torah was able to dwell deep into the natural tendency and the evil inclination and the greed a person would have naturally in order to increase his assets. So he will tend to underpraise the value of the kodoshim in order to increase his wealth. So if I will give him the permission to convert a existing kodoshim in a different animal, though that the animal that he is about to convert to happens to have a greater value, may lead in the future for him to compromise and convert to an animal with a lesser value. And for that reason, it was prohibited. And in that sentence, the Rambam concludes Sefer Korbonos, and we start the new Sefer, Sefer Tahara. And exactly in Hashgacha Protis, the Tanya Shiurim of the day when we have concluded the book of Sefer Korbonos and started the Sefer Tahara, happens to be the condolence letter that the Alter Rebbe sends to his Mechuten, the Holy Rabbi Levi Yitzchok, Sanhedrin Shel Israel from Berdichov, when his son Reb Meir passed away, which, by the way, there is quite a popular Hasidic song, Meirike Mein Zun, and in that particular letter he explains the difference between korbonos and tahara. The korbonos, since their inyan, the main point of the korbonos is the act of achilo, whether it is achilas odom, whether the person, kohen, or in some cases the bailim, are consuming the flesh, and the mizbeach will be participating in the achilas hoimurim. An idea of achilo is a unity, to be dam ubasor kibsori, to internalize the food and become part of it, which is what we call the ashpoe pnimis. For that reason, the type of ashpoe pnimis will be able to atone only on type of aveiros of sins a person was committing bishgogo. Because what was the idea of any act a person does? In order to, what was a sin that was done bishgogo? A flow of a das. Some das have disappeared from him, so by him bringing back on the type of ashpoe pnimis is able to be mechaper, to atone of such avoinos that were done bishgogo. But the idea of tahare, the idea of poro, that he compares the Tomos Shomirium in Parshas Chukais, where it is written, Lomo nismecho, why the parsha of the death of Miriam comes next to the parsha of Poro Adomo, to teach you that the same way as Poro is able to be mechaper and metaher, so same way the Misas Tzadikim is mechaperes, and the Alter Rebbe is medayek that the idea of Poro Adomo that is able to be mechaper, since the hashpoe over there is not a hashpoe pnimis, an internal hashpoe, but a transcendental hashpoe, which is a hashpoe makifo. Therefore, it is able to be mechaper on avoinois that were done be mezid. And for that reason, while the tikkun of korbonois comes from Zo and Malchus, which is the idea of Midois, so the shoyresh of the Mei Chatos and the Indian of Taharo Bichlal comes from a higher shoyresh, the shoyresh of Chochmo, and for that reason it is able to be Mechaper. He says when it comes to the Midois Horachmim, comes from Tikkun Noitzer Chesed. And indeed, the Hilchos Tumas Meis, which the sources in the Torah Shebiksav are both in Chumash Bamidbar. The first one is in Parashas Chukas, where it is come right bismichus to Misas Miriam, which is Mechaperes Alavoin Hadoyim, and in Parashas Matois in connection with the war that the Bnei Yisrael were having in Midian, and the consequences of Tumas Meis. This is the beginning of the halachos that opening Sefer Tahare. The mitzvahs Ese Achas is Din Tumas Meis, and the consequences, the application, is in four general application. First, it is one implication that a person is prohibited to enter Beis Hamikdash or to consume any holy food, where the exposure to such an act will be resulted, had it done b'mezid, with a isur kores. There is a prohibition even bizman hazeh for a kohen to get involved in any exposure to tumas meis, and as well, if a person is a nozir, he also prohibited to come in contact with anything that will have a tumas meis. Though by a nozir, some types of tumas meis won't require him to shave and to interrupt his minyan hanezirus. In order to simplify and to make a order in the complexity of Hilchos Tumah v'Tareh, it will be important to introduce three major inyonim. First of all, there is the item that brings the tumah, which is called the dover hametame. Then the second thing is the dover hamitame, the things that becoming tomei. And third thing, oifen, the way that the tumah is being transmitted. These are the three major principles a person must have in mind right at the entry of Hilchos, of Sefer Tahara and Hilchos Tumos in general. So when we are dealing about the dover hametame, the item that leads and causes the tum'ah to come about, we have to remember that there is a division to three categories. Odom, men, kelim is utensils, garments, and then there is oichlin umashkin, food and drinks. Then we must always remember whether we are dealing in the first generation of tumah, second generation, third generation, and so on. And when we are finally dealing with the way of tumah, the oifen tumah, how the tumah came about, we must remember whether we are dealing in tum'as mago. Mago is a direct contact, direct physical contact. Tum'as maso is a tumah which was achieved by carrying, shaking, or moving. Or the third way a tumah can be transmitted in tum'as meis is via oihel. Each and every one of those major principles is being subdivided to details and sub-details. So the inyan, the central theme of the first chapter in Hilchos Tum'as Meis is in order to inform us that each and every one of whether Tum'as mago, maso, or oihel was achieved, it results in a tumah, in a segregation of shiva of 7 days. Mago is a direct contact between the dead person or the dead part of the dead person, as we're going to see further, and between the person that becomes tomei. Direct contact includes each and every part of the body, whether the body of the dead person or whether the body of the live person who comes in touch with the dead person, which includes hair, nail, or any other organs. As long as a direct contact was achieved, the person who was affected by this contact will be a tomei tumah shivo. The strength of Tum'as mago applicable also on kelim, on garments. Besides, there is one exception, a kli cheres. A kli cheres, even if it came in touch with a dead person, it won't be contaminated with any tumor, since the way that a kli cheres, a clay, a dish made out of clay, will be resulted in a tum'as meis, only may aviroi, from the air of kli cheres. On the other hand, when it comes tum'as maso, the tumah that is being achieved via carrying, it's not affecting kelim. So remembering, tum'as mago affects odom and kelim, Tumas Maso affects only Odom, doesn't affect Kalim. When it comes to Tumas Oihel, the literal translation of Oihel is a tent. However, when it comes in connection to Ilchois Tumas Mes, Oihel is any form of a roof, and it can affect men and Kalim. However, it excludes, according to the Rambam's view, any tumo of a dead person who happens to be not Jewish. The tumo of a oihel can be achieved by three ways. Or the person becomes a oihel, becomes a roof over a dead person, or the dead person is the roof over a live person, or the live person and the dead person, both of them under the same roof. Either one of those three scenarios will affect the live person, that he will achieve a tumo of Shiva. As we have just mentioned, the Rambam concludes that a non-Jew cannot be metame, bring a tumo of oil of another person, and the reason is, since it is written in the Torah, Odom ki yomus beoihel, atem kuim Odom, you are called Odom, and ein umoisoilom, other nation are not called Odom. So, as everybody familiar, in one of the greatest challenging blood labels that the Jewish community in Russia was exposed in the final stage of the Tsarist Russia, was the blood label against Mendel Baileys. And part of the attempts of the prosecution to prove that he was inspired to consume blood for the baking of the matzos is by bringing a proof from this particular halacha that you are saying Odom atem kurim Odom, and ein umaysoilom kurim Odom. And at that time, Rabbi Maze, which he was the rabbi of Russia at that time, and he was participating in this trial, and he was explaining the meaning of that sentence. He says, you see, when anybody of the nations will commit a crime, they would never blame the entire nationality that he is belonging to. However, when a Jew is being prosecuted, so the blame will be automatically shifted and transmitted to the entire Jewish nation. They would never say that a particular person, Reb Mendel Baileys in this case, committed a crime. They will immediately link the entire nation, the entire atom, although it happens to be a Odom, one individual, one gentleman, but nevertheless, the accusation will spread to the entire public. So he says, if anything, there is no more proof and validity to this statement than this particular trial that right now we are participating, because though it is one Odom, you suspect him to commit this crime, but nevertheless the atmosphere of the anti-Semitism that is being flamed as a result of this case is way beyond the scope of this particular event. And each and every generation, bechol doir v'doir, oimdim oleinu lecha lo yiseinu, we can see it even in the current event and the wild this eruption of hatred, unfounded spread of fake news and so on, which are again proving the same point. Towards the end of the Perek, the Rambam defines what is considered the moment of death when it comes to Tumas Meis. So it comes right with the Yetzias Neshomo. Besides one Yoitze Min HaKlal, there is certain cases amongst them if the head was chopped off, though the person may be shaking in some of his organs, it still will be considered a mess as far as the tumor implication out of it. In the second chapter, which is the third for this shiur, the discussion is around a dead person, what is required in order to transmit the tumor. So depends, if we're speaking about a flesh of a dead person, all you gotta do is a kezais. A kezais will be able to cause a tumas mago, maso, and oihel. However, there is certain scenarios that even less than a kezais will be sufficient to bring the tumor. For example, if the entire organ is there entirety, and the entirety of the organ, according to the definition of the Rambam, if it contains basar, gidim va'atzamos, the flesh, the sinews, and the bones, as long as they are kebriosoi, as the original form, they will able to transmit the tumor even less than a kezais. However, if the flesh is missing, depends how much is missing. I have to assess whether this type of deficiency in the flesh, had it been in a live person, would he be able to recover or not? And even when a limb was amputated from a living person, as long as it contains flesh, sinews, and atzomos, he will be able to bring the tumor. Going back to a dead person, when we're speaking about bones without any flesh in them, the only way they will be able to be metame if they have one of the following conditions. Or we're speaking over here about a superior part of the human structure, which includes a scalp or a shedre, the spinal cord, or the majority of the bones a person have, or the majority of the structure, or just a loiva hakav, which is a measurement of sufficient atzomos. If all those, or some of those conditions are achieved, mago and maso and oihel. If we're speaking over here one single bone who happens to weigh a loiva hakav, so will be metame, will be able to transmit the tumor, mago and maso, but not oihel. There is a situation which is called rekev, when the body is basically to decompose itself. So there is quite a few requirements under which condition such a decomposed body will be able to bring tumor. And the general requirements that it must be of one dead person, it must be decomposed by itself, not with any external action. It must be stored in a certain way, whether the coffin made of marble or glass, and so on. When we're speaking about blood, the shear of a blood must be a revis and will be able to bring tumor both in mago, maso, and oihel, but it must be a blood of a dead person. If, for example, the blood is from a living person, or the process of death was started, the process of dripping, while he was still alive, and it was mixed with the blood that later kept dripping from him while he is dead. So in such a case, if they mix together, the only tumor is rabbinically. There is a situation though when a person who is being stabbed and his blood is dripping, and initially he was still alive, and this blood was able to be contained in a container or in a storage in the ground, and then on top of it the blood kept dripping while he was dead already, though that the majority seemingly blood that came while he was dead, nevertheless the entire blood will be tohir based on the principle that kamo kama botil. Each and every drop of blood that dropped while he was dead, however, it was added to the blood that was there when he was alive, so each and every drop is being bottled, annulled to the pre-existing blood that came out from him that he was alive, which was not metame. When it comes to a grave, as long as the tumor is inside the grave, so the grave will be metame, will bring tumor, whether in a direct contact, bemago, in oihel. On the other hand, when it comes to a goylel vedoifek can be temporary solution of a coffin. The top part of the coffin, it's called goylel, and the sides will be considered doifek. Can be a temporary coffin where the entire tumor will be only rabbinical. Another rabbinical tumor applies to a field that a kever, a grave, was plowed inside the field, and the bones of the dead body was mixed in the sand of the field. The entire tumor is only rabbinical. For that reason, it's only in mago, direct contact, and maso, but not in oihel. For that reason, they were also made a decree on Eretz Ho'amim, on the entire sand that outside Eretz Yisrael, that has a rabbinical status of tumor. Lesson 195 is first continues with the requirements that are necessary for a rekev, for a decomposed body, in order to bring in tumor. As we said, it must be one single individual buried there. He must be naked without any addition of clothes. The coffin must be from marble or from glass, and he must be buried there in his entirety. There is a discussion when a dead person is not bringing tumor anymore. For example, if he was burned but his structure still exists, he will still be causing and bringing tumor. However, if the entire structure was disturbed and not in a hole, so he is basically tohir. You can touch him and a person will remain tohir. A similar case, a flesh of a person that was decomposed and became powder like flour, so then it will be tohir, it's not metame any longer. The skin of a person, however, if he processes the skin, biblically he will be tohir, he's not going to bring any tumor. However, rabbinically, since they were concerned that people may get used to process a skin of a person in order to make leather, for that reason he will bring tumor, a skin of a person. There is another scenario where a person was able to pull out from a dead person the teeth, the hair, or the nails. If he managed to separate from the dead body, they themselves not going to cause any tumor. However, while they are still connected to the dead body, they will bring in tumor. The second chapter of this lesson is dealing about the accumulation, the tziruf of two things which will be metame from a mess. For example, if a person was able to combine a revi'is dam, but the revi'is represents not the blood of one person, is a combination of half a revi'is from one person to another. They cannot be added in order to cause tumor. However, when it comes to bones of different people, we'll be able to be partially metame only to tumas mago and maso. When it comes to a flesh of a two different dead people, which means a half akezais from one dead person and other half akezais from another person, he will be able to get added. Similar, talking about combining and adding, there is a discussion since mago, maso, and oihel, direct communication, carrying, and the tumah of a tent, there are three different types of tumah, so you cannot combine a full shiur via two of those categories. For example, if a person touches in one hand half a zais and in the other hand he touches another zais, so though he was touching in each and every hand a different kezais, but by adding those two half zais together, he basically adding them under the same category of tumas mago. However, if a person is touching half a kezais and he is carrying without direct contact, he is carrying via a other item, another half a zais. So the touching of half a zais and carrying the half a zais won't be able to be added together and the person will remain tohir. Same thing if a person, for example, he was carrying a half a zais and he was exposed to tumas oihel, whether he was above the other half a zais or whether the half a zais was above him or whether both of them happens to be under the same roof, since half of a zais is being accomplished via tumas oihel and the other half of a zais being accomplished via tumas mago or maso, they cannot be mitztaref and the person will remain tohir. The fifth chapter, which is dealing with the strength of the tumah. As we have mentioned before, the strength of the tumah is being determined about how far or how close a person to the origins of the tumah. So, for example, a person who touched the dead body and the garments or any utensils who touching him will be tomei for 7 days. However, if a person touches another person who touches a dead body, so biblically he will be tomei only for one evening. However, rabbinically, in case he touches the person while the first person still touching the dead body, so rabbinically, in most of the cases, he will have to be tomei 7 days. Besides, the rabbinical decree was not spreading in two exceptions, in an exception of a Nazir or in an exception of Pesach, that I will remain the biblical status. There is a chidush, there is something interesting that we are learning from the war of Midian, that even if a person was touching a garment or a utensil that is touching a dead body, the person, though that he is not in a direct contact to the dead person, however, there is only one stage apart from the dead person, he will be tomei for 7 days. How do I know it? Since the Torah writes, Kol hoireg nefesh, anybody who kills a nefesh, and noigea becholol, and he touches a dead person. So the only way to kill a person without touching is via kli, via utensil, via sword. When it comes, so therefore, Rishon and Sheni, both of them, which means the first generation and second generation, both of them will be Tomei for 7 days. When it comes to a third, for example, the sword was touching the dead body, and the person was touching the sword. Both of them will be Tomei Tumas Shivo. However, a third item have touched the person. The third can be whether another person or whether another keli. In such a case, the tumo will be for Tumas Erev, one evening only. When it comes to garments, to utensils made out of clay, they are tomei, but they cannot be metame others. In order to be metame others, you gotta be a av atumo, and anything that made out of clay cannot be a av atumo. The general ruling that av atumo, the father of tumo, will be able to be metame also Odom and Kalim. When it comes to Vlad Tume, offspring of Tumo, will be able to bring Tume only on Eichlin Mashkin. Any generation who touches the Av becomes the Rishon. Anybody who touches the Rishon becomes the Sheni. You touches the Sheni, you becoming the Shlishi. You touching the Shlishi, you becoming the Revi. The only implication is in regard to halachos of Trumo and Kodesh, as later we will discuss. Each and every Tumas Erev, each and every Tumo that results only in one evening of Tumo, it is a must that should be Vlada Tumo, offspring the Tumo, and not Ava Tumo, because typically in Meis, Ava Tumo will always going to be a result in Tumas Shiva. When we're speaking about Tumas Oihel, so if the oihel, the tent, was made out of material like flax, wool, leather, so this itself, the material itself, becomes tomei and needs to go through a purification process of sprinkling of the water of the Pore Adumo. However, if the oihel happens to be a building material like wood and stone and rocks, so though the contents who happen to be in the same building while the mace was in there, whether the contents was Odom or Kalim, which will be affected by the fact that they were contaminated in Tumas Oihel, but the Oihel itself won't be affected. There is another important information that despite the fact that a mace is a very severe tumo, the tumo of Mishkav and Moishov, that the items are which are below him and above him won't be affected. For example, if he happens to sleep on 10 mattresses, so only the mattress that underneath him and the mattress underneath the mattress that right underneath him will be affected. However, all the other 8 mattresses won't be affected, because this is a specific tumo that only Zav and Zovo will possess. But Tumas Mes, despite the other great severities, doesn't have this type of tumo. Thank you so much and have a great and successful week.